Joel and Ethan Coen could have been called legends long ago, never mind now that they're both right around retirement age. Ethan directed a movie on his own just earlier this year and has another in the hopper, although his older brother hasn't made anything since the tragedy of Macbeth a few years ago, and he doesn't seem to have anything upcoming. But if one or both of them want to rest on their laurels and enjoy life without continuing to make movies at a steady rate, who can blame either of them? They don't have anything left to prove. Now, I know regular listeners assume I'd segue from that opening with a line about how our sponsor, Sparkplug Coffee, doesn't have anything to prove either. Well, that's not true. Any food or beverage product can't say, hey, I've done all these great things. That's good enough. I can slack off now and serve you crap. And lucky for you, Sparkplug isn't sitting on any laurels and they aren't serving you crap. Because yes, they've got the freshest, fairly traded, premium Arabica beans in Canada. Those beans can be half calf or decaf. They've got a delightful variety of blends and roasts, including rotating seasonal blends. Canadians and Americans will get their orders sent within a week, and we Canada dwellers don't owe anybody anything for shipping. And let's make this even better for you by getting you set up with a membership in Sparkplug's Autopilot Coffee Club. That will snag you all kinds of perks and even lots of deals. Plus, you will save money every time you order something. You can also cancel or even just pause anytime. And you can customize to get your orders when it suits your needs. They aren't going to send you a shipment like clockwork and maybe make you pay for something you don't need yet. This is just not a run-of-the-mill Coffee of the Month club. So the site in your browser should be sparkplug.coffee/HYES. Our HYES discount code will save you 20% off your next order. And use that money you just saved to bribe your physics teacher. Well, we dig on Sparkplug, but you're probably ready for us to talk about the Coens and their very personal Jewish movie. Bev, we need some music.
And action! Have you ever seen
A Serious Man? Hi, Movie Monkeys, and thanks for doing us a mitzvah, Bev, by downloading the 601st episode of Have You Ever Seen? Our podcast is all about classic movies, which we review and spoil every Monday. I'm the seriously angry man who most likely doesn't have anything on the inside of his teeth. I don't know, maybe I do. Ryan Ellis. And here's my wife, someone who would never ask me for a get. Well, maybe she would. So she can marry the likes of Fred Melamed. You probably aren't going to do that. Bev.
That's me.
The coming attractions trivia question for this week's picture, the 601st of this podcast's history, A Serious Man. Which band has 4 different songs on this soundtrack?
You threw me a softball this time, and it's Jefferson Airplane.
Yeah, I didn't know what to think. I looked at this for a long time when I was at work a couple of days ago, and it finally hit me when I saw the songs on the soundtrack. Is that relevant? Are they just big fans? Maybe they just like the music, which it might be that. Maybe they grew up on it. Or it might be they picked them because quite a few members of the band are Jewish, although Grace Slick, the lead singer, is not. And of course, Rabbi Marshak quotes their lyrics at the end of the movie, so obviously the guys think those lyrics, maybe it's supposed to just be funny, but maybe they think they are profound.
I looked up the lyrics because they play such a big part in the movie. And other than Don't You Want Somebody to Love, which gets repeated over and over, that whole refrain is most of the song. Every other line is like, when everything around you is broken, when your life is worthless. Everything is actually pretty bleak. And then it's like, don't you want somebody to love for the misery around you?
So maybe that's why they picked the song. Or it might just be, it doesn't mean anything. And the Coens just said Jefferson Airplane.
It's just a song they had in their head at the time.
All right, wait. The Coens are Jewish? Was rolled out by Focus Features going on 15 years ago in early October 2009. Actually, I don't remember if I knew they were Jewish at any point, really. You see this movie, though, they gotta be. Then it went wide in November that year. It didn't quite break even domestically, but it ended up pulling in more than 4 times its cost worldwide. That's a bit of a surprise. You think it'd be the other way around. Maybe Israel loved the movie? But Bev, the movie is 15 years old, so please remind us what this gawky teenager is about and give us the skinny on A Serious Man. It's already had its bar mitzvah if it's 15 years old.
Yeah, that's right. Michael Stuhlbarg is Larry Gopnik, a middle-class math professor and family man living in suburban Wisconsin in 1967. Larry's wife is leaving him for a family friend. His brother is sleeping on the couch and getting into endless trouble with the law. His daughter steals from him, doesn't respect him. His son spends more time getting high than getting ready for his bar mitzvah. Larry's up for tenure, but someone is sending the college anonymous letters impugning his character, and one of his students is trying to simultaneously bribe and blackmail him. And then everything starts to go wrong.
So many things go wrong in this movie. It is a Job story. It's also, in a nutshell, Uncut Jews. Uncut Gems. You said it when it was over. That movie stressed you out. And it reminds you so much of this one. This came first, of course.
Yeah, it's too effective at putting you in Larry's shoes. Impotent, helpless, watching his life fall apart. Oh, the stress.
I feel like I've used that show before, Uncut Jews, but of course that's a double meaning. I think they probably are cut in that way. But it was a reference only to Uncut Gems. That's the intention there. Okay, there are pretty good numbers on this film, even though it's not one of the Coens' most red-letter titles. The Rotten Tomatoes critics are pretty big fans. 89% of them say it's good. 199 fresh are on the site, 24 rotten. The average is 7.9 out of 10, but only 68% of audiences, so a fresh tomato, but not by that much. The best reviews for the Coens are True Grit, and this is in order, by the way, Blood Simple, Fargo, Miller's Crossing, No Country for Old Men. So that's way down. Was that 1, 2, 3? It's fifth, No Country, the Best Picture winner, and the one that maybe a lot of people would say is their best movie or their favorite movie the guys made. For us, it's probably Fargo. For me, it's Fargo.
Not Big Lebowski?
Well, I just didn't put the... I love Big Lebowski.
It's your favorite of those.
Okay, my favorite, but Fargo's the best movie, the one I watched the most. Even more, I think, than Big Lebowski. This was 145th at the 2009 U.S. box office. Avatar was number 1. We covered that many years ago. Up, not us, but Up was 5th. And The Hurt Locker was 116th. That competed for this for Best Picture, along with Avatar, of course. Hurt Locker won. Up was in that category, too, for that matter. We've covered all these movies now, all 4 of those. No Country, by the way, was a pretty big hit in 2007. Not a monster, but by the Coen standards, was a pretty big hit. And, of course, it won all the Oscars, which is probably why this got made, because it is a pretty niche type of movie to make. No stars.
I read several times from critics, they said, this is the kind of movie you can only make after you've won Best Picture.
I guess that's true. But then True Grit, which followed this the next year, was easily, far and away, their biggest hit. So No Country's their second biggest hit. Then they make this, which does succeed for the most part, and it's well respected. But then True Grit, by any standards, is a pretty big monster hit. They've had no hits like that since, and they haven't made a movie together in a while now either. But this was up for Best Picture against Avatar, Hurt Locker, Up, and many others. Best Picture and the original screenplay. So the Coens had 2 more nominations. They've had so many in their careers, and they've won 4. Hurt Locker won those 2 categories, incidentally, that night. And this was 82nd on the BBC Culture list of, 200 or 100? I think it's 100 best films of the 21st century so far, which was out, how many years ago? Was that a few years ago?
Pre-pandemic, I feel.
Okay, so about 20 years into the decade. Inside Llewyn Davis, we've covered it, was 11th, and No Country for Old Men, of course we covered that a long time ago, was 10th. So 3 movies for these guys, just in a century, that are on that list. True Grit's not, I don't think so, I didn't see it there. Anyway, we've both seen this movie many times. It might be 4 for me, it's definitely 3. I assume it's at least twice for you, maybe 3 times.
3 times.
What do you think of it? The word respect might come up a lot today, I bet, right?
I think
but not like.
I do like it. I find it to be the most impenetrable Coen film.
Right.
Not that that's all bad. There's so much pleasure in watching a beautiful film. It's also a very challenging film. It's a puzzle, and I get new clues each time I see it. And I think I like it better each time I see it, though it's just so stressful to watch. It's just too effective. Like Uncut Gems, it's a masterpiece, but how could you put me through this?
I didn't feel as stressed out as you did by the movie, but I definitely don't feel relaxed by it either, which is, of course, is a contrast to, despite the violence and things that go on in Big Lebowski and Fargo and Oh Brother and those other great movies they made, you do feel like you're watching a movie. Well, Tarantino calls a lot of his movies this. He loves this about Rio Bravo, a hangout movie. I think those movies that applies. This does not. This is a movie that's very serious, and it's so much based on their history as Jewish kids in Minnesota. So is it St. Louis Park or something like that, Minnesota? And these locations, if they're not the actual places, and I think in some cases they are, the movie was shot all over Minnesota, it at least represents the things that they grew up and saw. Some of Danny's friends' names are their friends' names.
Their parents were both academics.
Right, then they made the unlikely transition to Hollywood as filmmakers. I don't know if they knew Sam Raimi, and that's how. I think they met him when they started working in movies. But it didn't hurt to have his cachet because of his Evil Dead history. I think it was Joel that worked on that movie, too, the first Evil Dead film. And then they never really worked together specifically, I don't think, but they were friends back then, probably still are. Look at the career he's had. But then he's gone the more Hollywood route, and they rarely have. Have they ever made a movie that's actually truly Hollywood? Even the ones like
Intolerable Cruelty, which was a failure. Yeah.
That wasn't good, and neither was Lady Killers. There are good things in those movies and great stars in them, but they're not very good by their standards. But then this followed. No Country followed those failures, and then this followed that. So this is that great run. Inside Llewyn Davis came after True Grit, so that was right in a row. No Country, this, True Grit, Llewyn Davis. And then since then, well, we like Tragedy Macbeth quite a bit by just Joel. Ethan wasn't involved in that. But we didn't at all like earlier this year Drive-Away Dolls. Ethan made that with his wife, Trisha Cook. We've covered Trisha Cook lots of times because she's been a co-editor with those guys in many movies. I don't think I ever knew or said before in a previous podcast that that's Ethan's wife and has been for a long time. So she, I think, co-directed that with him, or at least co-wrote it. And even Margaret Qualley, who's so talented, is bad in that movie.
It's
I
a
hate
lot.
to say this, but maybe Ethan needs Joel to be good. But then Joel has nothing upcoming. It's funny to see that. Ethan's got a movie, like I said, coming out later this year, I think, or something in the hopper anyway. Maybe not this year. But Joel has nothing since Macbeth. On IMDb, it always shows an upcoming project, and people like Spielberg have 90, it seems, and Scorsese do too. But Joel has nothing, and he is in his later 60s. Maybe he feels like, well, I've done enough. I don't know. But these guys together have made so many classic movies. This is the one that we respect, like I said, but don't truly love. Now, what about this cast? Because Michael Stuhlbarg, who was getting to be a bit of... Well, no, he wasn't a name yet.
This was his first big movie.
Right, and this helped make him a name anyway. He's been so good on TV in many roles, but then in that 2017 year, the year of 2017, The Shape of Water, Call Me By Your Name, and The Post, all Best Picture nominees, and he's in all of them. And he's a very important part, especially of Call Me By Your Name, but even of The Shape of Water. The Post, I think, he was just one of the members of the cast, not a big part of that movie.
It was a cast of millions, and everybody was a movie star.
And here's a guy that year was outstanding, of course, but he's worked with Marty, Spielberg, of course, in The Post, Del Toro in Shape of Water. He's in the MCU because he's in the Doctor, or at least one of the Doctor Strange movies. I think more than one, maybe. He's been in a lot of Best Picture nominees. They were all Best Picture nominees that one year, and of course this was in 2009. But he wasn't expecting to get cast. He thought he might be Arthur, but then they gave that role to Richard Kind.
Yeah, I saw an interview where he said that the casting process from his first audition to getting the call and learning that he got the part was 11 months. And he was a theater actor. They had seen him in plays. He was a Broadway star when they asked him to read. And I think even initially they wanted him to read for the guy in the beginning, that little fable, the Dybbuk
No,
part.
he would have been the husband.
He would have been the husband, not the Dybbuk. But then they decided to go with actors who could speak fluent Yiddish.
And apparently that sequence doesn't really mean anything. It's just to get you in the mood or something like that. The opening text...
The mood of tension.
Well, yeah, I guess that fits, doesn't it? The opening text says, receive with simplicity everything that happens to you. Good piece of advice that it's hard to take, no matter who tells you that. But it is, what do they call it, a shtetl? Is that the house? Anyway, I wrote shtetl down. I forgot what that means exactly. Did you notice, by the way, that opening sequence is in 4:3?
Yeah, they changed the aspect ratio when they get to the rest of the film.
And then the wife stabs the Dybbuk, who may not be a Dybbuk because he does bleed, but he also walks away laughing. So I guess maybe he was a Dybbuk all along. And a Dybbuk is basically a poltergeist or something like that.
If you are sitting Shiva for someone who's died and you don't do it properly, then demons get their body. I'm actually not sure exactly how it works, but it has to do with sitting Shiva. And one of the theories I read about that opening was, of course, it plays very big into the whole theme of uncertainty, which is a huge part of this film. Is it a Dybbuk? Is it not? We don't know. Maybe they'll never know.
Does it mean anything? Does it not? Maybe not.
Right. Does that whole thing mean anything with the rest of the movie or not? A lot of people like to think that part of the reason all these terrible things keep happening to Larry is because those are his ancestors and the Dybbuk cursed his family.
Oh, yeah, I read that too. By the way, one thing I happened to read on Twitter a day or two ago, not about this movie at all, but someone wrote, nobody under 30 has ever been named Larry.
We have a friend named Larry who we knew when he was still... Did you meet him in his 20s?
Definitely.
There you go.
So it's not true, but it's just a funny tweet. There are some names, for me, associate with young boys and not grown men, and vice versa. I don't know, do you picture an Arthur as a little toddler, for example? But that's the name in this movie. Of course, he's Lawrence Gopnik, but Larry. And Larry, Stuhlbarg, does start the movie at the doctor, and at the end of the film, he gets a call from the doctor because it looks like he's probably got cancer. The doctor doesn't confirm that, but when he says, you need to come see me, that's never good.
He says, we have to do this in person. Because he's like, can't you tell me over the phone? Oh, we looked at your chest x-rays. And of course, that moment happens immediately after he changes Clive's grade.
Finally does it from the F to the C minus. I like that touch, though. First it's a C, thinks about it, then throws in the minus.
Yeah, because he's not happy about doing it. Plus, he wants it to seem real, right? I read another theory that Clive is Larry's Dybbuk in a way.
Okay.
Because the proverbial wheels have fallen off of Larry's cart. That's what happens to that family. The wheels fall off his cart. This good Samaritan comes out of nowhere and helps him, but it turns out that it's a curse. Everything's going wrong in Larry's life. And then Clive's bribe is the help that he needs because it's the moment after he sees his bill from the lawyer. I think it's the criminal lawyer, Arthur's lawyer.
Case,
yeah. But by accepting this help, he accepts the curse and is immediately punished, as is his son.
Well, a tornado is the last thing in the whole movie, and it's the son that sees it with his friends and that guy he owed money to. He's trying to tell him, I got your money. Doesn't finish the sentence. There's a Coen touch for you. We know what he's thinking. We know what he's about to say is that I've got your money, but he doesn't actually say the word money. And I think that's the last line is, I got your... That may be how the movie ends, and we see the tornado in the distance. And I guess tornadoes aren't the least common thing in the history of the world in that part of the world, but they weren't common. They're still not common now. They will be soon. Global warming. I'm sure Minnesota and maybe even Toronto will have their share of tornadoes in the next couple of years or decades anyway. But it was a weird way to end a movie like this, but it actually did happen, I think, in the Coens' youth. And it does play off yet again of this Job thing where here's another, well, it's one damn thing after another. This movie's all about that, too.
The whole movie, it's him not doing anything wrong. He doesn't do anything right either. He's a man of inaction.
A very important line
always
is...
says, I never did anything. I never did anything. The line.
I didn't do anything when he's talking to the Columbia Records guy.
But he says it several times in the movie. He might say to the rabbi, I didn't do anything to deserve this. But inaction is inaction in a way. And he seems like a very passive guy. As much as his wife is a caricature, she says things to him like, you knew we had problems. I begged you to go to the rabbi. All these things that he didn't do, that he didn't address. Not sure what the story is with his kids, but obviously he's not that involved of a parent because they don't take him. They are just teenagers, but they don't take him seriously at all. He goes up, he tries to fix the aerial for them. He definitely tries to give his daughter hell for wanting a nose job or whatever, but they don't listen to him at all.
What's he do when he goes up to fix the TV antenna, the aerial? The one time we see him do that, maybe he goes up there multiple times. One time we see him, he's peeping on the neighbor who's naked. I don't blame him. But that would be something that God would judge you for, too.
He doesn't really commit any meaningful sins. And he does everything he's, quote, supposed to do. You can definitely see that. He's got the good job. He's got the family with the 2 kids. He goes to shul and he gets his kids bar mitzvah properly. And he's doing everything right. He's taking his brother in. He's taking his brother in. He's living up to his duty with his brother. And yet all these terrible things start happening to him. But still doesn't give you permission, because some people would say, well, if I'm going to get punished anyways, I might as well do whatever I want. But it doesn't work that way because he still gets punished for doing anything he wants. And I guess you could argue that Cy, who commits the sin of adultery, who takes his neighbor's wife, he's punished with death.
Cy Abelman, yeah, the Fred Melamed character. Well, the line he does say, I think it's in the Columbia Records scene. And by the way, that voice is the voice of Riley Diefenbach from Fargo. Mr. Lendegaard, need those GMAC numbers? Same guy. There are only 3 actors, I think it's only 3, that are from any previous Coen movie. Certainly, they're not major characters and not major actors, but it's just Michael Lerner, who I don't think even speaks. He has that scene where he shows up and dies. He's been in lots of Coen Brothers movies, right? For example,
he's the lawyer who died. One of the terrible things that happens to him is this guy dies right in front of him.
He's the studio boss in Barton Fink. I'm nominated for that all those years before. Steve Park. Mike Yanagita. Remember me? He's Clive's dad.
Oh.
Who challenges Larry in his driveway about the son's grade. And then Warren Keith is the Columbia Records guy. So anyway, back to the I didn't do anything. I've got down on my notes here, I always do them sequentially, so it must be that scene where he says, I didn't do anything. And I guess you've already addressed this, but I want to make this very clear that I think there's got to be a double meaning. Does it also mean that he should have done something?
Yeah. That's one way you can interpret it. We can't say anything for sure with this movie, what anything means.
I didn't do anything wrong, or I didn't do enough. But he doesn't feel like he hasn't done enough, except maybe that's what God is judging him for. What about the rabbis? The first rabbi, the second rabbi, and then finally Rabbi Marshak, who he doesn't see. He tries to. He didn't look busy when he tries to go see him. The secretary says he's busy doing nothing. But then his son gets to see him later on at the very end of the movie. His only advice is to quote Jefferson Airplane lyrics. He gives Danny his transistor radio back that was confiscated at the beginning of the film. Then he can give the money he's tucked in there to give to the guy where he got the drugs from. This is something I don't think I really picked up on until I read this online, but I guess that's the connection. And then the only thing he says beyond the Jefferson Airplane lyrics and quoting the members of the band, apparently he leaves a couple of them out, but he does mention most of them. But he also says, be a good boy. So if Larry had gotten to see him, he wouldn't have got any help anyway, just like he got nothing from the junior rabbi and from Rabbi George Weiner's character. What's his name again? Sussman? Sussman's the story tells. Anyway, the George Weiner character is the one who tells him that story about the dentist who sees the writing on the teeth. So the rabbis help him? Not at all. And I don't think Marshak would have if he ever saw him in the first place. And maybe that's also part of the point. The Coens are Jewish. We know that. This movie makes that extraordinarily clear. Are they almost like Woody Allen, the Jewish thing, where they don't have any respect for it whatsoever, even though you know they're Jewish and they've made it very clear in a film like this, like he often did, but also just think it's stupid?
We don't know what we're talking about when it comes to this stuff, but
Religion in general or
religion in general.
Judaism.
But yeah, Judaism, particularly devout Judaism. But what is the job of a rabbi in terms of comforting people? If you think of generations of Jews and what they're being comforted for, part of your job, if you're comforting your flock, for lack of a better word, but your congregation, I don't know what the word is you just have to get them to accept the most unimaginable tragedy. Because over many generations, and when this movie takes place, everybody would have a memory of the Holocaust. Larry was alive when the Holocaust happened. So if you're a rabbi and you're trying to comfort people, I mean, how do you comfort people who have been through all the trials that Jewish people have been through over the centuries? The attitude is, don't think too hard about it. Just have a laugh. What's the quote at the beginning? Just try to be light.
Well,
as you face challenges.
With simplicity everything that happens to you.
Yeah, so a Christian minister might try to give concrete answers, but that's from generations of privilege, of not suffering.
They'd be full of crap, too.
They would be full of crap, too.
Nobody knows what happens when we die other than the people that died.
And he wants answers, but how does a faith give answers to a God that has punished them as much as God has punished? What's the joke in Fiddler? God, I know we're your chosen people, but once in a while, could you choose someone else? So they've been through so much, so that maybe is part of the Jewish ethos. And of course, we can't let Larry get any catharsis or clarity, because the whole point of the movie is that he just has to live with this intolerable uncertainty.
This intolerable cruelty?
It is intolerable cruelty, but it's also flailing around in the world trying to make sense of something that doesn't make sense.
Do you think he was happy before the movie started? Was he in love with Judith?
No.
I don't think so either.
There are moments in the movie where he's happy when he's watching Danny get bar mitzvahed.
Yes.
And he's reading the Torah, he's high as a kite, and they're oblivious to it, fine, but...
Danny's high as a kite.
Danny's high as a kite, but Larry and Judith are together, they're feeling it, and he has
She
this
apologizes.
feeling like... Yes, and he has this feeling that everything's going to be all right. His boss tells him he's probably going to get tenure. All right, everything's coming together. And he thinks everything's going to be okay, but then, of course, it's absolutely not.
It's really tying the room together. No carpet peers in this movie.
His job is that he teaches mathematics of physics. So his life is the definition of certainty. That's the appeal of math. There's always a correct answer. I think he says as much to Clive. You're right or you're wrong. You're not writing an essay about Shakespeare. There's a correct and an incorrect answer. That's kind of the beauty of mathematics. And there's this elegance and the solidity to a mathematic equation. You can tell he likes his job, like when he's writing on the chalkboard and he's talking about
Look at how much he's written on the chalkboard.
Cat, and he's talking about Schrodinger's cat, which is about the principle of two things being true at the same time. So that's uncertainty. Is it the uncertainty principle? I'm really revealing my ignorance right now.
Schrodinger's paradox is what I wrote down.
Oh, okay. I read a great thing where they said that him and Cy are Schrodinger's car accidents, because they both have car accidents at the exact same time. Larry walks away without a scratch and Cy's killed.
And Cy is just trying to turn into a golf course, and I guess he gets impatient and somebody plows into him. We don't see it actually happen. We find out when Judith is crying about it because he's dead in a car accident. Well, the daughter tells Larry, actually. Larry's car accident happens because he sees Clive riding his bike and he gets mad and he's not paying attention to who's in front of him. And of course, 1960s cars, maybe even 1950s cars that they were driving in 1967. In any case, cars back in that era were built like rocks, so nothing really happened to anybody because they're so powerful. I'm surprised that Cy was killed when he would have been barely going any kind of speed at all, which is maybe why the Coens didn't show the accident, because why would he die with these giant hulking cars?
Well, the irony is those cars were death traps. We're way more likely to survive a car accident in our cars because they buckle.
I guess so. Maybe somebody T-boned him too. That would make sense. Somebody driving and he doesn't see them coming as he starts to turn left. Maybe that's what happened to Cy. He got T-boned. But with Larry, it's from behind, and those great big bumpers, they barely even got scratched when you would whack them hard. You still really wouldn't do anything, those old cars. But he does something he shouldn't be doing, which is not paying attention to the road, because he's mad about a kid riding his bike. And he should have just given the bribe back, I guess, in the first place, and then he wouldn't have to feel mad at Clive. But he's held under all this time.
He has many opportunities to tell his boss what happened, and he never does. So you know he is flirting with the idea of keeping that money. It sounds like he needed that money before he ran into all these problems and he needed to hire a lawyer, and Judith cleaned out their joint account.
Yeah, which she never pays for at all. I don't mean literally money-wise, but she doesn't get punished for doing that.
She doesn't get punished for anything, even though she is the worst. I hate her. But her bold selfishness and just the impatient way she steamrolls Larry and gets away with it. It's important for the movie, I think, that she's the one that takes the most heat and is the most obvious in the way that she ruins his life. But she's like this great cinematic villain because she's also really hysterically funny. This isn't about oopsie doopsie, like her weird lines and her constant indignance that goes along with Cy's weird, smug
He's
BS.
funny too. Fred Melamad's great in this movie.
Very funny. And the two of them together, and he's constantly hugging him and getting in his space. And then we learn later that he's the one who's writing those disparaging letters to Larry's boss.
Which maybe would have kept him from getting tenure.
Yeah.
And that famous scene from this movie, well, as much fame as this movie ever had with anybody, it wasn't exactly a monster hit or anything. I'd be surprised if we get a lot of downloads, but it is the Coens, so maybe we will. Sometimes we're surprised by these more art films that do well for our channel. But anyway, that scene, and it's on IMDb. You know how if you go on IMDb, you'll see the first frame of a trailer? Maybe for some people, they let the trailer play, but I got annoyed by that, so I disabled that, so it just shows the very first frame. Well, I don't know what it'll be by the time we post this episode, but as of today, the first frame is that scene where Melamed is bashing Stuhlbarg's head against the blackboard. But that's just a fantasy. It's just a dream.
This is part of his
just
dreams,
like
yeah.
when Larry is having sex with Mrs. Samsky, the neighbor, that's a dream.
The whole film lives in this elevated reality, like has a very dreamlike style. And a lot of his conflicts put me in the mind of those nightmares. You want to scream or run, but you're paralyzed. That's kind of how he lives his life in this paralysis. And then the movie contains these great dream sequences that blend seamlessly with the film because it maintains that tone. And they express his fears, but reality is its own nightmare. And then the ending with that tornado. The dream turned into a proper surreal nightmare. Beau is Afraid borrows pretty heavily from that tone,
Okay.
I think.
Just thinking right now, is his office at least partly in the basement? The kind of thing where the windows are at ground level, but it's the top of your office?
Oh, I would need to see it.
I asked that question because if Larry's office is underneath the ground, that's where you want to be if there's a tornado. But his son and these other kids are outside exposed to this tornado.
They're trying to get into his cellar, but the teacher can't get it
Right.
open.
So
or something.
Larry
The
might be
tornado's
okay.
not far.
But then Larry also is probably going to die from some kind of cancer.
I remember the first time I saw this movie, I had just read this beautiful memoir by Shalom Auslander. It's called Foreskin's Lament, and it's about his life growing up in ultra-Orthodox community. And he hated his father, and he has this whole thing about how before you're bar mitzvahed, you're a child, and so you don't get punished for your sins. But each of your sins is visited upon your father.
God.
It's surprisingly funny, but he has this whole thing about how he keeps breaking the Sabbath because he wants his father to be punished.
Well, look what happens with Danny.
Well, Danny...
He's not a very good kid.
Right. Danny's not the worst, but he's not a great kid. And I remember that being in my mind when all these terrible things are happening to Larry. He's not doing anything wrong, but Danny's doing all this misbehaving. And then the moment Danny is bar mitzvahed, he gets punished, although I don't think he does anything overtly wrong in the time it takes for that tornado to come. But the idea being that suddenly he's going to get punished for his own sins now because he's been bar mitzvahed, so he has to take responsibility for his own actions now.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, something I didn't know about. Just like that whole get thing is a ritual divorce. That's what Judith and Cy are insisting on. I mentioned that Melamed's really funny in this movie. Maybe anybody would have made this line funny, but the Jolly Roger. You should go stay at the Jolly Roger. Grown man, probably mid-40s is what Larry is. He's being told by a guy who's cuckolding him, go stay at the Jolly Roger.
Yeah.
Not a motel or a hotel. And, of course, Arthur goes with him, too.
Pay for it with money that we've stolen from you, so you
Right.
have nothing.
And it's not a motel or hotel chain that we're aware of in Canada. Maybe it doesn't even exist anymore. I don't know, but the Jolly Roger, it's a funny line. Much like there's so many great funny lines in other Coen Brothers movies. They find a way to make an ordinary word funny. I always appreciate that. I always said about Kramer, some of the lines that would have been on the page wouldn't be funny. When Michael Richards did the character, then it was funny. And the Coens are masters at that. By the way, we talk about him having cancer probably at the end of the movie. It sounds like he does. And it was 2 weeks ago, Cleo from 5 to 7. That's the whole plot line in that movie.
That's right.
And also, I just realized when I was editing Once Upon a Time in Hollywood earlier today, that we have a lot of consecutive movies from last month in June, and I think into August, and maybe we've done this lots of times before, but where the director is also the writer, and usually on their own. Agnes Varda wrote and directed Cleo from 5 to 7. Tarantino obviously always writes his own movies. The brothers did this. Next week we're doing a movie where a co-writer is the director. And then going back into June, I forget what it is right now, but 2 or 3 of those, same thing. Maybe that's why some of the movies we're covering lately are such either classics like Cleo from 5 to 7, or you could argue this is, and some of the ones coming up certainly are, because these filmmakers, these directors are also their own writer.
Most of my favorite filmmakers do their own writing.
And they're not really working,
often.
even though Tarantino is, but still, he's Tarantino. It's not really Hollywood per se. The Coens have been in Hollywood for a long time, but they're not really Hollywood filmmakers. Obviously, Agnes Varda wasn't at all back in those days.
I think in order to be a good director, you have to have a good handle on how to at least make a script good. Every director, in a way, is a writer because the script is something you have to be able to improvise with.
I'd be surprised if we could just go into magically every film that was being made and just be a fly on the wall during the process of the filmmaking. That the director or directors, in this case, of course these guys do write their own screenplays, but somebody who never gets writing credit, Spielberg rarely does, if he wasn't actually writing with them but never actually took a credit for that. Hitchcock, for example, never took a producer credit, but he was his own producer, and it sounds like he helped write whether he wrote the movies or not. And his wife, Alma Revel, should have got way more credit than she did, but again, a tangent. So back to A Serious Man. How about the teeth thing? So that's a fable, and that's what this movie is too. There's a line in the movie about how...
There's two fables within the movie, which is a fable in a way of its own.
On the teeth it says in Yiddish, help me, save me. But that's on a goy's teeth, so people like us, not Jewish people. And this dentist named Sussman gets obsessed with it. He's looking for meaning. What is George Weiner's character's name? I didn't write it down. But he is, by the way, from Spaceballs. It's funny, I was thinking of him as WKRP. He's the sleazy photographer that took nude pictures of Jennifer in, I think, a two-parter on WKRP. But you're going to know him from Spaceballs. He is Rabbi Nachner. That's his name, Nachner. But he tells that story about Sussman, that's Michael Tesla plays him, Dr. Sussman, who is obsessed with this whole deal with the teeth, looks in other people's teeth, can't find a meaning, and then just gives up on it. I don't know if Nachner knows what he's really saying to Larry, but it might as well be, there is no meaning, stop looking for meaning in what you're doing, and just live.
Yeah, one of these days you're going to wake up and you're going to stop thinking about it. Because what choice do you have? Does God talk to us? And most of the time, no. He's just not very clear. He's forever going to be intangible and unreachable, and we're never going to understand why he does the things he does. So stop looking too hard for meaning, or resolve to find meaning where you can. The first rabbi keeps saying, look at the parking lot. I love that.
Oh, that's a great touch. He's pretty funny.
He is really funny, yeah. I never really liked Big Bang Theory, but every time I see Simon Helberg in anything else, I'm like, this guy's a great actor. He's very funny. He has great screen presence. I loved him in Annette, a super weird movie where he stands out. His performance is my favorite thing in that movie. But here he is, he has this one scene, and he definitely doesn't waste it. We can find beauty and meaning in anything, like the parking lot. And he just keeps talking about the parking lot. And it's the ugliest suburban Midwestern parking lot.
It just hit me right now. Why does anything happen in Fargo that happens in Fargo? Because Jerry Lundegaard wants to open up a parking lot, and he has the whole kidnap plan so that he can get money from his father-in-law to start a parking lot, and he'd be the owner, proprietor, whatever. But then his father-in-law, oh, it's a deal. Take this. You're going to finder's fee. But that's the whole reason why that movie happens. He just wants to open a stupid parking lot in Minnesota.
We said this already. The Coens are from the Midwest, and they grew up in a town just like the town in A Serious Man. They were very intentional about this. A lot of people call this their most personal film. Like you said, there's names of characters that are straight from characters in their childhood. So they understand the Midwest. And I think they hate it because they must have love. They keep revisiting it. They certainly have a lot of love for their characters. I love Larry so much. They love Larry so much. You can tell. It really comes through. And in Fargo, oh my God, are there more lovable characters than some of those characters in Fargo?
Yeah, they're criminals.
Even the criminals, but I'm thinking of Marge and the rest of the cops and Norm. Oh my God, I love them so much. But they also seem to have laser-focused criticism of everything that's wrong with the Midwest. Like, contempt.
They just don't make it.
Right.
It isn't literal with them. A lot of writers who aren't as good as them would probably make it literal with some of the things they criticize.
Treeless streets, this suburban sprawl, this meaningless life. Part of that comes from growing up in a place that is so devoid of, I don't want to say culture. That's not really fair. And I've never even been to these places, so I only get my impression of them from Coen films.
You know what's also fitting is that, again, we talked about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood last week, and that's set in 1969, February and August of 69. This is only 2 years earlier. Now, this is a very small community in Minnesota, and that is Hollywood, obviously. But that movie does deal with, and I don't really think they are hippies, but Rick's always calling them hippies. That's a big running theme, right? The Manson people. But this doesn't have any of that.
They haven't reached Minnesota yet at that point.
I guess that's what it is, because you got this little
It feels like it takes
enclave.
Place many years before Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, but that's just the difference between living in the Midwest.
This feels like it should be
Hollywood.
1951, not 1967.
Yeah.
But then in this small
behind.
town, they probably didn't have hippies and those kinds of things, unless some of the kids wanted to import it, and I guess eventually they would do that with things like smoking pot, which if he was found out, Danny would have been in real trouble. For one thing, it was illegal. We can think it was stupid, it was ever illegal, but it was illegal.
Only 13.
And he
too.
starts doing it when he's 12, let's not forget. Maybe even
Right,
earlier,
right.
but he's at least 12 when the movie starts. He could have been doing it for a long time and not paying his dealer. And lucky he doesn't get beat up for it. But obviously a key character is Richard Kind, who's one of the most well-known actors in this movie, at least when the film came out. Arthur has that cyst he's always draining, which is a disgusting thought to have. And when in the dream he's going off to Canada with the money from Clive that Larry gives him, the neighbors, the aggressive neighbor with his son when they're hunting earlier on, in the dream, Larry imagines that they shoot him in the cyst. Did you notice that? He's shot, and that's where he gets hit.
That's where the bullet goes in.
So he's got that running theme, which doesn't really mean that much, I don't think, except...
I think it's like the way that he's an annoying person.
Especially
who
to his
just keeps
niece.
making all their lives
Sarah's so mad.
difficult. He clearly loves his brother. You can see their connection. You can see there's kindness there. And he wants to understand his book that he's writing.
Mentaculus.
The Mentaculus, which reminded me of Robert Crumb's brother in the movie Crumb, a beautiful, incredible documentary.
Or the books that John Doe was writing in Seven when they get into his apartment.
Yeah, you look at it and you're like, this is probably nonsense. This is probably the ravings
genius
of a madman.
Or insanity?
And then there's a scene where he's been gambling. He's using the Mentaculus, which is supposed to calculate the probabilities of the universe so he can use it to cheat at cards. And so that's why he was winning at poker, but then he got arrested for gambling. He gets arrested for soliciting gay prostitutes. Yeah. And he's just,
sodomy
in general,
is part of it.
Right, yeah, he's in general just a bad house guest. And you kind of hate him. You love Larry for being kind to him, but you understand why he would want to stick him in a canoe and push him up to Canada. You're like, that would be best for everybody.
But there's two pluses I will say that probably save him a little bit. One, he's played by Richard Kind. One of George Clooney's old best friends, by the way. It seems like a weird combination, but they are really good friends. Richard Kind is with Clooney. But the two things are John Oliver had him play... What was his name? This is an interesting tie-in, by the way. The Sacklers, right? He had him play the top Sackler, his name is Richard or something like that. And the guy apparently said, in reality, I don't know, to all kinds of questions. And of course he knew. He was lying his ass off. But then they cast Richard Kind on Last Week Tonight to go, I don't know.
And that Richard Kind is so funny.
I don't know.
I don't know.
So that makes us laugh because he's a funny guy to begin with. But then at the end, did you notice when Danny is being bar mitzvahed, Arthur is glowing. He's grinning ear to ear. He's so happy.
Yeah, he's not a bad person. You get the impression he has some kind of undiagnosed mental illness. He really can't cope. And I think a very important scene is when he has this freak out at the Jolly Roger late at night. Larry's chasing him. They go out to the pool, and he's freaking out.
He's crying, isn't he?
He's crying, and he's saying, you have everything. You have everything. And we, the audience, is like, what are you talking about? Larry's losing everything. His life is in shambles.
He had everything.
How can you be so insensitive with everything he's going through? He goes, you have everything. And Larry says, no, I don't. He goes, what are you talking about? You have a family. You have a job. And he's right.
In comparison to
Arthur, he has everything. He doesn't have a cyst growing out of the back of his neck. He doesn't have a mental illness that forces him to misbehave. He's a straight guy, so he just fits in with society. He doesn't have to find companionship in a way that's literally illegal. He has everything compared to his brother, and it gives you a little bit of perspective. And it probably gives Larry a motive to keep standing by him, even though he is continuing to ruin his life.
Yeah, he's already gone through his own problems over the years. I guess not quite the same way that Larry is now. But what life does Arthur have, especially if his brother's going to die of cancer? So let's talk about the cast. I already mentioned Michael Lerner, Steve Park, and Warren Keith are, if not the only three of the only ones, and it's not like they're giant names, that had worked with the Coens before this movie. I already talked about Stuhlbarg's credits and some of the great things he's done. He's been involved in so many big things for many years. Richard Kind has been acting for nearly 40 years. We've covered him in Argo, so I guess maybe Clooney might have had a hand in getting him cast in that, because Clooney produced it for Ben Affleck. And of course, he's so great. You didn't love it, but I'm one of the people that loved him as Bing Bong in Inside Out.
I think I'm the only person on earth that doesn't love Bing Bong.
He had a great voice for that. A lot of guys would have done that really well, but Kind is perfectly cast to have played the imaginary friend. Sarah Lennox, who plays Judith, this was her first movie. She's only been in about 4 others, including Cafe Society for Woody Allen. Amy Landecker, the first time you see her, I think it's the very first time, is when she's sunbathing nude. Of course, that's very appealing. She's not as hot the more you see her. So,
what do you make of the scene where Larry goes to visit her? You get the impression he's trying to flirt with her. He mentions his divorce right away, and her husband isn't around. And
I don't think he's ever touched a joint before.
Oh, and then he has a dream where he's having sex with her.
Right, exactly.
Hysterically. It's funny.
What's her role? I guess the temptation. I've read something about Bathsheba.
Oh, of course, bathing.
From the Bible.
Yeah.
And then the thing, too, is that it's not just that she's topless. I thought that she was. I hadn't seen the movie in a long
she's
time.
Bottomless,
but she's flat out naked. You don't see any pubes or anything like that, but you can tell from the angle that she's not wearing...
I saw the pubes.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
Oh, I wasn't looking that closely. Well, that's one thing, too, about this. We watched it on Canopy. Of course, the print is 1:5:1, so it's not a widescreen movie. And we said already it was 4:3 and the shtetl thing at the beginning. But our internet connection often made it look really pixelated, so we can't blame anything other than that. It's not the movie's fault. Roger Deakins shot it. I'm sure it looked beautiful, but it was hard to know a lot of the time. I say I'm sure it did because it looked pretty terrible for us sometimes. But what are you going to do? Sometimes Netflix or Prime, or in this case Canopy, don't look very good because they didn't stream very well. Back to the cast here. Fred Melamed has had a long career, including some 80s era Woody Allen films. He comes up again. And he's been a pretty big deal on TV for a long time. And I do love him in this. I think he's quite funny, that whole Jolly Roger thing. And he's a serious man. He's the one that's called a serious man at his funeral by the rabbi, I guess, right? Giving the eulogy. Aaron Wolf and Jessica McManus play Danny and Sarah. This is the only movie either has ever been in. And
really?
Pretty good in this. I'm surprised they didn't do anything else with the Coens or somebody.
Danny has a lot to do, and he's great in this movie.
He really carries his role quite well, but never again. Didn't act in anything else at all. Amy Landecker plays Mrs. Samsky, another person that's been in TV so many times, so many shows. But Enough Said, which we covered, didn't we? We did, right? For the Now Playing project many years ago.
Right.
She's in that in some kind of role. Adam Arkin's pretty big in this as, what is he, just a litigator? He doesn't even have a credit, I don't think. But he has many meetings with Larry in this, a big TV guy as well. As for the Coens, the writers and directors and producers, they've been doing those three jobs. We didn't know it for the longest time until the mid-2000s when it finally became Joel and Ethan as the directors, the writers, and producers. It was always Joel directed, Ethan produced, and they both wrote. And they both edited all this time, too, sometimes with Trisha Cook, Ethan's wife. But they finally shared directing credit. I think it was right around the time of Intolerable Cruelty, or maybe it was Lady Killers. But this is the 8th movie of theirs we've covered, which is not half of their filmography, but we're getting there. We've covered Raising Arizona, Fargo, The Big Lebowski, Oh Brother Where Art Thou, The Man Who Wasn't There, No Country for Old Men, and Inside Llewyn Davis. One of these days we got to do Blood Simple, maybe next year. So they produced it along with Coen regulars as executive producers, at least in this case, Tim Bevan and Eric Fellner. They worked with the Coens a lot of times in their history, and here they are again. So I mentioned Roger Deakins shot it. He apparently didn't shoot Burn After Reading before this. Oh, I forgot about that. That was between, oh, that's right. It was No Country, Burn After Reading, then this, then True Grit, and so on. Okay.
And Deakins did not shoot Burn After Reading.
Right, it was somebody else. And of course, the Coens don't even use Deakins anymore anyway. It's been Bruno Del Bono, maybe, I think is who they work with now. Anyway, Deakins shot this. Worked on Shawshank, Fargo. So Shawshank wasn't them, of course. That's Darabont. Oh Brother, Man Who Wasn't There, No Country. And he finally won 2 Oscars on consecutive nominations after all those times being Susan Lucci'd for so many years when he shot so many great films, when he won for Blade Runner 2049 and 1917. And of course, Carter Burwell did the music, as he so often did. I don't know if he does anymore. Maybe he still does.
I think at the time this was made, at least he did everything except for Oh Brother.
But his only nominations have been for other people's movies. So it's funny that Deakins finally wins, but not for a Coen Brothers movie. And Burwell finally gets nominated, but not for them. And the guys did cut the movie under the Roderick Jaynes credit. What happens next? Well, I guess Larry dies of cancer. After all he's been through, it seems fitting that he gets taken out by a vengeful god in one of the most painful ways possible, especially back in the 60s. We said this on Cleo from 5 to 7. She was going to get radiotherapy, but it's the 60s. Yeah. Do you survive the way you can now? The drugs you have now are so much better, and chemotherapy rather than radiotherapy. Although, will anyone call him a serious man at his eulogy? Because he wants to be a serious man, wants to be thought of that way. And who will fix the area once he's gone? Danny will be demanding
How will they watch F Troop?
TV's going to look terrible. All right, then. We don't really get the movie, but we certainly respect it.
I think we get it better than we think.
Not as much as we did at some of their best comedies, but we did laugh. The movie's good. I don't know if I'm going to see it again for a long time. Your last thoughts on A Serious Man?
I also don't know how soon I'll be watching this movie again. But maybe I will, because it is really funny. And there is the endless appeal of a film that doesn't give you all the answers.
And that weird opening. The Dybbuk, by the way, was Fivish Finkel. Pretty famous Jewish actor.
Great name. So
that was how we saw A Serious Man. Next week, we'll be putting a lovely bow on the month of July by talking about a film that was requested by a longtime listener, Jess. And she made a good call on this because this is a terrific suggestion, and it's also a 25-year-old movie. And you know how we like the 5s and 0s around here. It's Brad Bird's perhaps best film,
The Iron Giant?
The Iron Giant. I said that because The Incredibles is 20 years old, but Iron Giant's 25 years old. And I say perhaps best film, and people might be saying, The Incredibles, Ratatouille, what are you talking about? I said perhaps, and when we see it again, maybe we'll be saying for sure that we think this is the best. You probably will say it's his best film. I know you're not a fan of Ratatouille, but Incredibles is pretty good.
Yeah, okay.
Next week.
We'll talk about it next week.
The coming attractions trivia for The Iron Giant. A certain legendary rock star has only been a producer. Oh, I talked about a rock star with this, or rock stars with the Jefferson Airplane with this trivia today with Serious Man. But here we go. I didn't think about this. I've got rock star again. So a certain legendary rock star has only been a producer on 2 feature films, ever. One of them was released 20 years before The Iron Giant even came out. So it'll only take a little bit of work to find out who that rock star was who executive produced next week's movie, The Iron Giant.
All right, so for the answer to that question, check out next week's podcast about the Iron Giant. You already know how to find us, but let me remind you to favorite or subscribe wherever you listen, which is also where you can find our archive of hundreds of episodes that are available for free. While you're there, leave us a rating and a review. It's a great way to support the podcast. We also love to hear from you. Like we said, our next episode is going to be based on a recommendation from one of our listeners that reached out. You can email us, haveyoueverseenpodcast@gmail.com. We're also both on Twitter. I'm at Bev Ellis, and Ryan is at MovieFiend51. And you can find our podcast on YouTube. Our channel is at HYES Ellis. And to enjoy freshly roasted premium coffee delivered straight to you in Canada and the US, please go to sparkplug.coffee/HYES and enjoy a 20% discount.
Receive with simplicity the call to end the podcast.
And cut.